The presentation is Webform for everyone. My name is JacobRockowitz. I'm known as JRockowitz on the web. I'm a Drupal developer and software architect. I built and maintain the Webform module for Drupal 8. And what is the Webform? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back for a second. I'm doing a basic demo of the Webform module. I'm going to walk through the use case of building forms, collecting data, and distributing that data. And this is a clean install, and I like to start off this demo with the contact form. People are pretty familiar with this. It's very standard. And for the demo, I just want to add a company field so people can add their company information. I'm going to switch over to the builder, and here I'm going to add an element. I'm going to add a text field. I'm going to call it company. And for this presentation, I'm not going to go through every feature, and I'm just, there's every aspect of every element you see is customizable in the sense of you can add lots of descriptions, extra data, prefixes, suffixes, control where the title's laid out. But, everything has reasonable defaults, so all you need is the title right now. And that's what I did. I entered company. I'm going to hit save, and it adds it to the bottom, and you go over to the view, and you can preview it, and there's company. I kind of made a mistake here where I want it to be your company required and directly below your name. So I'm going to go back to the form builder and kind of switch modes. You can do this in the UI, drag it up here, hit edit, but I want to switch over to the source mode. So the source mode is the YAML source behind the form that you can go and edit as plain text. So I'm going over to company and I'm moving it up under your name, which is right here. And I can copy over the required value, and I can go in and change company to your company. Okay, I'm going to hit save.
I didn't know you could edit YAML through the UI like that. That's cool.
Yep. Yeah, it's a code mirror editor. And I'm going to actually explain a little bit more about the YAML for people as I switch to the developer. That's kind of the goal of the presentation, to be like, this is really cool, and for the developers, explain a little bit more about it. But now that I've made the change, let's look at the change. And I'm going to go to a different mode. I'm going to switch to the test tab where we can view the change. You see right here your company. And the test tab will fill out the form for you. Every single element has test values. So if you have a massive form with 100 inputs, it will fill that out. And then all you have to do is scroll to the bottom and hit send. And we've actually now switched gears in terms of the use case that we built the form, and I've hit submit, and we've collected a submission. It's a very simple message at the top. But we now have data in the database, and we're going to start looking at that data. So I'm going to click back and go over to the results tab. And we're looking at the single submission here. It's a table that you can customize and control what columns are visible, how it's sorted. You can also override this using the Webform Views Integration module and just put a view on top and get full customization. And now we can look at a single result. And here's our data right here. This is some metadata about the submission. And just to show you a quick preview of an advanced feature, you can convert that submission into a PDF. This is very simple. But this is a template that you can fully customize and do anything you want to the PDF. I see lots of people doing stuff with it. You can take this PDF and attach it to an email. That's built in. And there's some other utilities that are worth pointing out. You can edit it, as anyone would expect. You can edit it over here. You also have a resend tab. Or anyone doing a lot with email, this tab is extremely useful because I'll scroll down. The email that's being sent out is very basic. But you can use this to debug your custom email templates and kind of get previews, look at it, tweak the twig files behind it. So now we've kind of just looked at the data that we've gotten, and now let's talk about distributing that data and pulling it out. So I'm going to go back up to the results tab, and I'm going to go to the download tab. And this allows you to download all that information to a CSV file. For this demo, what I'm going to do is switch to a table. And by the way, you could download, this is a cool feature, you can download every submission as individual PDF documents in a zip file.
Is that new?
Yeah, it's not new, it's in the last 6 months to a year, and there's even a dedicated screencast on video for that feature.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I'm going to lose my rhythm for a second on that one, but that's cool. Ask questions. But the table, I just want to point out, so you can really customize that CSV, but for this demo, all I'm doing is I'm going to generate an HTML table. This checkbox is nice in the sense of HTML tables open up in Excel and work really well, but we don't need to do that because I can go down here And by the way, when I talk about customizing, you can say what columns you're going to get, how those columns are structured. But just to show you that file, I could not download it and open it on screen. And you get a nice, clean HTML table that you can customize the style. You can put an extra header in it. I'm going to touch upon that a little later as we go on. Whoop. Click back. And let's keep going. So what are some of the features included with the Webform module? Well, the Webform module provides all the features expected from an enterprise proprietary form builder combined with the flexibility and openness of Drupal. That PDF tool that I talked about, that's an enterprise feature. And what's great about it is it's using the entity print module, which is part of Drupal. It's completely customizable. You have full control over that PDF, which is that's the power of the Drupal community. And just some features, just to break them down, we've seen a drag and drop form builder. Multi-column layouts are fully supported. You can even have forms pop open in modal dialogues on your site, conditional logic, scheduling of forms when they open and close for events. You can pre-populate it with query string parameters. Email handling we talked about. I'm going to do a demo. Actually, I'm not going to do a demo remote post, but there's a handler to take data as it comes through and just push it to another server. With submissions, you can set limits. There's previews built in. You can auto-fill a form. Jumping down to the end, that confirmation message I showed in the demo, where it's a little green box, is pretty simple. You have full control over that confirmation, so you can have a dedicated page. You can have a dialog pop up. You can even redirect to a separate dedicated node. With all those features, there's a lot of elements available, and I'll show a few more of those as we go on, but I kind of wanted to give you like a screenshot of everything that you could possibly think of, and this isn't everything, but it's enough. Standard elements are supported, HTML5 elements are supported, meaning like email, URL, but then you can get into rich file uploads, signatures, there's buttons, ratings, image selection, addresses, which I'll do a little demo of, and then within those elements you can do little enhancements. So when I say select menu enhancements, you can take select menus and convert them to chosen, choices, or select to. I wouldn't use them all at once. There is support for computed values. So that's like doing calculations on the fly within a web form. Tooltips are just helpful little ways to do labeling. Slide outs, it's another way to show information where it just slides out. And then there's lots of rich validation features like input mask, word count, regular expression validation. Even elements have their own access controls that you can work with. And, yeah?
Like the community I would use this for, users would be like making multiple submissions.
Mm-hmm.
Like say for events that they run a couple times.
Yeah.
I saw that you can do like pre-populated data. If a user had an account, would they have to fill in all their information every time they?
There are multiple ways to do that. So the question was, how do you pre-populate a form? The most simplest way is use tokens. If they're logged in, you can use tokens to pull stuff from their user profile. There's also an autofill feature in the Webform module that will look at previous submissions. So if they're doing event registration and they've registered for one event, you could go in and say, listen, look at their last event registration and pull only these fields. You check off the boxes, and it's kind of useful because for events, you probably only want to pull their contact information, but not their specific, values for the event. And that works out really well too. But it's I will admit, pre-population is tied towards authentication. No problem. Yeah, the entity print module I kind of called out. With the submission importing, I think it's important. So this is a submodule, but there's a submodule. You can export the submissions. There's a submodule to import submissions. This makes it very easy to migrate other data from outside form builders. You'd rebuild the form in Drupal. You'd get that outside form builder to generate a CSV, and then you could import that CSV into Drupal really easily. And finally, there's option limit support where you can kind of set specific limits per option. So I'm going to demo that in a little bit, but the idea is like if you had rooms in an event and you could only have 9 people in one room, you can track that. And you can even build custom options. This is a very new feature. It was just included in the last release. And what you're looking at is an SVG of the United States of America that was cut and pasted into a text field. And the SVG just has IDs on the state. and basically gets wrapped in JavaScript to convert it into a full accessible input. So this is tracking what state you're selecting in the background in a select menu with full keyboard accessibility with the panning and zooming. It's a really powerful feature. I built it because someone was doing an event registry, a conference, and they wanted people to pick different booths visually to know what the map of the layout of the conference center was. I also do a lot of healthcare, so you can do this for medical diagrams, what part of the body is bothering you. And I'm showing you a lot of features and talk about it, but the Webform module ships with reasonable defaults, but everything is customizable. It's really important. You don't need to feel totally overwhelmed, and even that feature you'd have to turn on as a submodule. I think this is a good example of when I say everything is customizable. This GIF is showing you every single label that's available for an input. Don't do this. Don't put everything on at once. But what it's showing you is you have a simple title, but then you could have a tooltip that will pop up and placeholder text. And then there's even a more slide out. It depends on your use case on how you should use these different features. I only use the more slide out when I have to have a paragraph or two of text. For example, I do some medical stuff and we need to give a definition. And the slide out works out best because someone really needs to slide it out and see the full definition with hyperlinks that are clickable. So what can you build using the Webform module? It allows your organization to build any type of form. So these are just some examples of forms where we're talking about college applications, job applications, employee evaluations, registration systems, events, which I'm going to keep going with. You can even do online donations with the Drupal Commerce has some integration. I work in healthcare, I do appointment requests. You can even have people do very complex user profiles if you need to collect a lot of data about them. I'm talking you want to get their entire medical history, you can create a dedicated profile for them. So for site owners, I kind of wanted to point out, instead of leaving this to the end, is like, how do you get some support for all this stuff I'm talking about? And I want to emphasize that there's a ton of documentation and screencasts of every feature. On Drupal, on Stack Exchange, there's a community giving answers to questions, and the issue queue is very active fixing bugs as they come up. And yet, this is just showing you that there's videos about every feature that I've just talked about. There's a dedicated screencast that you can click on and it'll walk through. And when I add new features like the PDF and even those custom options, there's a dedicated blog post and screencast walking through how it works, what's the concepts behind it. It really helps. So if you find a feature and you're curious about it, usually Googling the feature will get you some good answers. And yeah, I mean, my goal is just to inspire you, your organizations, to build awesome web forms. And to do that, you need site builders. So we're switching gears to just talk about site builders. And how do you build awesome forms? Well, you got to learn what's going on. So you can learn from the examples, templates, and demos. And there's a dedicated web form examples module which will give you a style guide. It'll show you how a multi-step form would work. It shows you multi-column layouts. It even gets into some of the advanced, nuanced elements. And like computed elements are pretty tricky, so there's a working example of it. And I think I'm going to show you the style guide and the computed elements. There's also composite elements. It's the first time I'm introducing it. Simply, a composite element is a group of elements working together. The best example there is like an address. You want to get street, city, state, and have those inputs working together. You can do that even if you were doing a registration system and you had multiple people and you wanted to collect, you're bringing guests, you can collect those guests using a composite element. And to break it down a little bit more, think about it, everything's an element. This is a good way to look at Drupal. Like anything displayed on a form is an element. And if it collects data, you can consider that an input. Composites, I just gave you a definition of. Containers is an element that holds a bunch of sub-elements together. That probably could be a details, a field set, a section. And pages, that's how multi-step forms kind of break down. It's a container, and that breaks the form up into individual pages. And the examples, the demos are pretty good to walk through, and I'll walk through some. And the first one to start off was the style guide, which this is a kitchen sink of everything available for you as elements. So we start off with really standard elements, but then you start seeing the buttons kicking in. And date, these are all the different variants of date elements that are supported, including date pickers. And this is email. There's a variety of email options, just a common and limited element, so it's validated. phone numbers, and let's get to the more interesting ones. File uploads, drag and drop sorting. If you're doing something where you need sortable information, there's the cute kittens because you can get photos. They work out really well. I've seen some great stuff. I did some great work with patient education where they have patients that can't speak, so they use this widget to create communication boards. And basically they click on a bunch of graphics and they hit print and they hit submit, and it generates a PDF that is printed out for a patient to point and say, I need water, I need the bed adjusted. It's a really powerful, kind of cool feature. There's ratings, and I like the signature. There was a senator in New York that implemented the signature to do voter registration. He did a prototype with it, and you had to sign your registration form. Moving ahead, Likerts. Entity references, for those people really up on Drupal, you have full support for entity references when you're building a form. And when somebody who's not familiar with what an entity reference is, it just means as you're filling out a form, you can point to other information in Drupal. So you could select users on the site. You could select events, other nodes. You could even reference other web forms with references. And this is an example of referencing taxonomy terms. And then composites, these are just some quick examples.
One brief example of how that would be used?
What?
Could you just give one brief example?
Entity references,
Like how have you used it?
I have a document, I do this great work with Patient Ed in New York, I don't mind plugging them. So they have 800 documents for patients, and they have a web form to request printable versions of those documents, which are nodes. So there's an entity reference field that just lists out documents, and they can go and select literal documents on the site and make a request. And what's nice is, with entity references, then you can pull in all that rich data using tokens and be like, here's the document, here's the date, here's the owner, here's a hyperlink. You can even pull in teasers. It's a great question. And this is composites really working together, and I think it's important to point out what I said, the example of an address. This is a single composite, but you have support for multiple, so you get really nice widgets where you could then say, I'd like to register 5 people, and get a grid that can be filled out. And for people with designers, because I'm not talking about designers here, but this style guide allows your designers to know what to expect. They're looking and they see, okay, this is how required elements are going to work. Things can be disabled, how input masks are going to work. And that gives you a way to kind of track your design and kind of work with it. And by the way, this is a form. You can customize it. Most people I know who use the style guide will go in and tweak it a little bit and take out elements they don't want. And show that point. I want to make that point. Like, everything's customizable. You can turn off elements you don't need. If you don't need file uploads on your site, turn that off. There's no reason to let site builders add file uploads if you don't need it. If it's not, it opens up a slight risk to your site because people are uploading files. And this gets into those containers, and I think these are important to have your designers look at and think about. And these are all the dividers available, and you can customize those. I haven't talked about it much, but there's full support for messaging. This is kind of more than what Core does on a lot of levels. It's inline messaging, dismissible messaging, and you can dismiss it based on, permanently, per session, per user, with full tracking of it. I mean, these are just set up for just this page, so if I hit refresh, they'll reappear. And I do like this last widget because it just shows you the power of the Drupal community. So this is another address widget, which I call the advanced address, because this is the address module integrating into the Webform module. And the address module was built for Drupal Commerce, but it's available for everyone. And the idea is you pull down any place in the world, and it gives you a perfect address for that place in the world, with validation on the zip code and the information. This is crazy cool. And just how powerful Drupal is like, this is the best example of how powerful Drupal is, because this is not my code. It's someone else's code that I just wrote a few lines to integrate it in. With the demos, I'm going to just show 2 more, and I'm not even going to click much through and just be like, yes, multi-step forms are submitted. Every aspect of this multi-step form is customizable down to the labels, whether you have a progress bar or don't have a progress bar. You can have percentages. I think it's a small group, so I'll show a fancy advanced feature. It's not advanced, but it's available and people are using it. You can do computed elements, and what this is I can do calculations. So I'm going to just show you. It's very simple. You're seeing math kind of kick in, but you can have your inputs working together to generate values. In this example, this is an example of an entity reference to users. And all this is showing you is when someone selects a user, I can go pull in all that information. This is a computed element with AJAX. In the back end, you don't have to have AJAX on. This could just be when someone submits the form, you pull all this extra data in, or you do these calculations on, on the back end system. I'm going to go back up. I think that covers a lot of the examples. And I'm going to keep going. So another concept, and I'll jump back to the demo, is just to be like, there's a templating system. So there's a dedicated Webform templates module, which allows you to kind of set starter forms that your site builders or your content editors can just copy. They can go in and say, I want to build an event registration system. I'm going to copy this existing event registration. And there's a lot of examples, and I'm going to just show you them because it's pretty easy. It's over here as a second tab next to forms. I'm going to show, I work in healthcare, so I like showing this form. I put a lot of energy and thought into it. It's just an example of requesting a medical appointment online. You can delete this, or you can go and customize it. What this form shows you is a lot of cool stuff you can do with conditional logic, like asking the right question, are you a patient or caregiver, and changing the form as it goes along. And this is using multi-column layouts, and it's even using that composite, it's using that composite element that's totally custom, asking for when they might want to get a phone call back, what day of the week or what time. A little experimental thing. And just getting more information. And you can hit select, and then you can just literally make a copy of it. And this templates, once you make a copy of the form, this is completely separate from the template. So they can go and make customizations and it doesn't bleed back to the template. You can go change the template and it doesn't affect this form. So we've talked about a lot of concepts. There's also demos, and I built these demos because things can get really complex, and it gives you a starting point to understand how to build complex systems using the Webform module. The two demos that are really popular is an application evaluation system, and that's really simply someone fills out a job application, or it's a college application, and then you're going to want to collect evaluations on that application. And it's a way to create the proper references so that you can have a submission that someone's filled out, and then send out an email automatically using the Webform module, and have people kind of go look at that submission and fill out a little form below it, and it will track that information. For the demo purposes, I like doing event registration because I think everyone's done this before. You have events, and you want people to register for them. And the demo, and it's just a dedicated module, but I have it turned on, is this idea, and this is the demo module just turned on. Just shows you, generates 3 events that you can look at. I'm not going to click register, but note that the button's here, which is a nice feature, because when you get here, you've got an event, and then I have a form attached to the event. And it's the same form over and again. All 3 events share the same form. It tracks the submissions. I've set submission limits. I click register. By the way, the goal of these demos is to show you all the fancy bells and whistles you could have, and you can turn on and off and choose what you want to do. I like this modal dialog pattern because for events, some people don't want to register. They want to see it first, and when they click register, you know their intent. And this helps make the user experience very clean because it's a dialogue that they can go and fill it out. I'm going to fill it out a little bit. And this is the option limits that I mentioned before. So for this demo, was like, well, let's do t-shirt sizes. And the idea is we're keeping track of an inventory of t-shirt sizes. And we go in and say, I'd like an extra large t-shirt at this event. And I'm going to hit register. And boom, it's registered me. Very simple. And then I'm going to go back up to the results tab. And this is important. I'm not going heavily into this. This is a Webform node with the event registration form attached. And when you do that pattern, you basically get dedicated submissions for this event. This node, this is a list of people registering for this one event on the site. And you see that one record going through. And even with those submission limits, it will also track the inventory. So if you have rooms, you'll see what's filled up, what's not filled up. Yeah, it's very useful to spend some time to see. And most of these demos don't have, actually, I don't think there's any like PHP code in it. It's more about just showing you how to configure these things to work together properly. Including, that's why that block is sitting there to just show you that there is a submission limit block that will track it. Okay. So now we're getting into how do you extend the Webform module, because that's really part of Drupal. It's like Drupal is extensible. And there are add-ons for that. So I showed you all the features in the Webform module, but there's a huge community, 100 plus add-ons. And this is just showing you, for example, one of the questions I always get is how do you protect against spam? And the add-ons tab is basically keeping track of all the spam protection modules, and you can pick and choose them.
Module's great, because
Yeah.
I love that module.
Yeah, Honeypot's great. People are using Antibot, which, by the way, my demo, I typed the word spam, so Antibot doesn't come up, but that's the one module that's missing from this demo, or that's just the GIF. And so we're really talking about extending the Webform module, and now it's really switching gears to the final audience I'd like to talk to about it. And I'm not going to get too technical, but I think it helps for site owners to be like, yeah, this is possible for my developers to work with. And I'll show very little code, and I hope the code, even for people who are not coders, they can appreciate some aspect of it. So what can you do with the Webform module? Every aspect of the Webform module is extendable and customizable using plugins and hooks. It's kind of a mantra for Drupal. Everything's customizable. And just to get people up to speed on what plugins are, they're small pieces of functionality that are swappable. And when I say swappable, I mean they're reusable, they're standardized, and they're extendable. So you can kind of take an existing plugin and say, oh, I want to do something slightly different with it. You can even replace it. There are three main plugins to the Webform module. There's elements, handlers, and exporters. Elements is exactly what we just looked at, those form elements. And to be slightly technical, is like there's Form API in Drupal, which defines an element in a plugin, and the Webform module defines its own element that wraps around Form API. That's why all those enhancements are possible. And handlers, when I'm sending out an email, I'm using a handler. It routes data. It handles a submission. And that allows you to send out those emails if we're talking about remote posting. You can even you can use handlers to change how a form's going to behave. The best example I could have for that is there's a settings handler where you can conditionally change the confirmation page's message based on what the user entered. So it's a handler that's basically like, well, I have a submission, someone said they're a patient, my example, they're a patient, I'm going to give them a different confirmation page. If they said they're a caregiver, I might give them some other information. And exporters are kind of the simplest simplest plugin. That's when I generated that spreadsheet, that's an exporter. That's what generates the data going out of Drupal. I'm going to walk through some of them, and I'm going to keep it very simple. This is just an example of a composite element. I'm showing this code because I wanted to emphasize how this is pretty much what you need to generate a custom composite element. So the idea here is I'm just doing a first and last name. I'm specifying this is Form API, which I'm actually going to explain a little bit of, but just saying it's a text field, first name, last name, and there's a little template. This just gives you like control of how that form element's going to render, how it's going to look. So if you want to do kind of multi-com layout, you can tweak that template. Usually it's just outputting these elements right there. And handlers, I kind of pointed these out. Emails, there's support for schedule email. I didn't even bring that up in that demo because it's like getting so far into the back end, but that event registration demo shows the scheduled email handler working, because for events it makes a lot of sense. When someone registers for an event, you want to send an email out immediately. But then you also want to schedule an email to go out to remind them one day before the event that they registered for the event. And that's what the scheduled email handler kind of takes care of for you. Remote post, just pushing data, literally just saying, here's my CRM, and pushing data to it. And actions and settings is really about like tweaking the behavior of forms based on conditional logic. If they entered a certain value, the difference between actions would be if someone enters a certain value, you could flag a submission, you could lock a submission, you could close a submission. Settings, you're changing the behavior of a form, you're changing the settings behind it. And debug is kind of fun just to point out, is there's an handler just to show you the information that's going back and forth from when somebody hits submit and what's going to go out to, what's going to go be pushed into the email handler. And this is, so I'm not going to show you the code on the handler because that gets more complex, but this also just shows you the exporter plugin. And I want to point out, this is what you saw when I generated that HTML table, this is the code that's behind. It's just taking those values and generating TD tags, putting into a table row, so you can go and customize that export into any style format you want. One of the lighter plugins. And switching back to good old hooks, because hooks are functions that define or alter behaviors. And I still like hooks. And the idea is hooks just open up, you can tweak anything. You can go in and alter a form. When I say alter a form, you can change how that form's going to look. You can also, let me see what's some other example. Well, I think it's important technically. So Webforms use entities, and every submission is an entity, so you have all these entity hooks to tweak things when you're hitting save on a form, whether when it's inserted into the database, when it's loaded, saved, or deleted. And the last two, these are just external libraries and access controls. And I really like this one, because this is a hook called Hook Webform Handler Invoke Alter. And basically this hook, anything that's happening on a form, you can alter it as it's happening. And this is an example where I've shown you the contact form and I'm sending out an email and it's capturing a contact form, someone's doing an email confirmation, and the post save is being called, and you go tweak. You can do anything you want when that form is being submitted. You can also do this in handlers, but it allows you to hook into anything going on your system. So if you want to capture every email going out, no matter what, you can do it right here. So getting a little more into the weeds on here is just how does the Webform module work under the hood? It's kind of going back to, well, the Webform module extends Drupal's Form API. I gave kind of a hint of it. And just to explain what Form API is, how Drupal handles data, you're building, it has a build method, a validation process, and a submission process. And yeah, this is a form. This is Form API, what you're seeing being rendered. And this is important because I think this is one of the more advanced features, but one of the most useful. This is the form as a render array. That's what we saw when we looked at the source code. This is how Drupal builds things. And this is the same, these are the same thing. This is YAML, which is just a simple markup language. And markup might be the wrong term, but it's a very simple way to describe things. And this is just PHP code describing the same thing. And I kind of want to make sure that anyone who's a developer looks at this and goes, this is not a big deal. And this is the anatomy of an input going on, where you're basically saying the name of it, the title, the type of input you're generating. You can add custom attributes. This gets into all the, basically you can do anything you want to that input. And I'm saying make it yellow, and I'm putting a custom class. And when I jump over here, this is what you get. This is exactly what's rendered in the markup. And you have, what's nice about Drupal, it also has reasonable defaults. So all this stuff was added automatically. You can change this, but by default, the size of an input is 60 and the max length is 255. And you can see a custom CSS fitting in. And that's the most technical I'm getting here. We're wrapping it up. I just think it's important if you're having developers come in, they should understand Form API, and I want to give some direction to that. And one of the best ways to learn about it is there's documentation, but anyone in the Drupal community who's a developer should be looking at the examples module, which are little snippets of like, here's a module, here's how to build a form in Drupal, or even Ajax. There's Ajax examples in there, which is really helpful. And I'm going to end with just saying, help support the Webform module. There's an open collective, and most people don't know what open collective is, so how can you help support the Webform module? Well, you got to get involved in the Drupal community by backing the Webform module's open collective. And its open collective is a service that's online that it allows open source projects to transparently collect and distribute funds. Organizations that back an open collective, you'll get a tax receipt, and you'll be able to see exactly how those funds are collected. And by supporting the Webform module, you're helping make a contribution just to say thanks if you're using it, but it also makes it possible for things like some marketing. The logo you see in the beginning was paid for by Open Collective. I'm trying to get security issues to kind of give people a little token thank you, $50 or $100 to say thanks for taking the time out to file a security issue. Maybe to offset some travel costs. Accessibility, I didn't talk heavily about it, but something we all care about in the community, and I'm thinking of paying someone to do a professional accessibility review of the module, which is a very accessible form builder. It's one of the most accessible on the market, but I kind of want to get that certification. Maybe, other ways to do support. There's more to come. And sorry I went the wrong. Oh, Just personally, you can help me. If you need help, I'm available. You can sponsor a feature, which I wrote a dedicated blog post about if you run into something you need done. A lot of the stuff I'm demoing, like the option limits, the PDF wasn't sponsored, but that map the United States that was an SVG was sponsored. You can contact me on my site, jrockowitz.com. And I'm just going to say thanks. And we're going to do questions, and I'll end on the logo. Okay, you first.
Hi, I have 2 questions. They're really quick. So when somebody fills out a web form, how long does the data stay in the system?
That's why I'm like, I'll touch the surfaces, because the question, that's why I also like, I'm going to just demo a few things to walk through and answer that question. Let's look at the contact form, for example, and go up to it. So, to step back, the Webform module supports saving drafts. So, as someone's filling out a form, they could hit Save Draft. If it's multi-step, you could save those drafts as they're filling it out. We even have the advanced feature where you can have anonymous drafts, where it drops a cookie and tracks them. That problem brings up what you just brought up, is how do we delete that data, or how long we hold it? We don't want drafts to stay in the system forever, so we added a purge feature, and someone else did this, Alex. And I'm going to go over, and we're going to look at the back end a little bit, and you can control, if you go over to this, I jumped to the wrong place. This is the global configuration. If I go over to settings, and I go to submissions, I'm going to collapse this so I can get down to where we're talking about. This is turning on the drafts, but then you can set up purge settings. And you could say you could purge drafts on a timestamp. So let's look at drafts. You can purge it after a certain number of days. You can say when something's completed. So let's talk about this completed thing, because then we'll get into the remote post pattern a little bit. If you're saying completed, and I'm going to say, hold things for 10 days, and I'm telling you, organizations do this because what they're doing is they're remote posting the data to another server. They don't care about it. They want it kind of they just want to make sure their CRM gets the data, they confirm it, and if something doesn't work, they can go in here and have some reference. And just to reinforce the other pattern, because you bring up data in Drupal, you can go into the tab, the general tab, and turn off the saving of results completely. No data goes into Drupal, it's never stored in the database, it's transient. They hit submit, sits in the server, comes back to them, and that's it. A lot of people doing heavy CRM integrations, including my healthcare system, doesn't want data in Drupal. They want it to go straight into Salesforce, and it works out really well. And what's your second question, Sanjeev?
Honeypot. So I've worked with similar things in Drupal in the past, but is it perfect all the time when it's collecting bad emails and bad things? Because I'm just in a situation where somebody really needs care and they have a really funky email address, picks it up,
Honeypot does?
Well,
you spam protector.
I don't know if it does, but it just says that it, it'll pick up, spam. So is it gonna take all the bad ones automatically, or is there a place where you can access that data or those bad emails
Not Honeypot. Yeah, it's important. Spam protection has different approaches and different levels. Honeypot's very much we don't like robots. And it just goes on the notion that if someone fills out a form too quickly, they're a robot and doesn't let them go through and just logs. It just logs that they tried. You lose the data. They have to wait a few seconds to fill out the form. I'm scrolling over here because I'm going into the documentation section on Drupal.org because someone wrote, I made a dedicated section for this blog post. This is not Webform specific. This is a great blog post about spam protection for Drupal, and it breaks down all your options. And each option has that different level. There's Clean Talk, which will read the text, and if they don't like the email address, they're going to block it. But then it's a rich paid service that will log it, tell you what happened, and come back to it. Directly with Honeypot, I am starting to see grumbles that Honeypot's no longer working. Automated bots are starting to figure out how to game it. They're starting to figure out what the secret fields are and how it's going. I think the best recommendation I give you is you should probably use 2 different layers of spam protection. So I use Honeypot and CAPTCHA at the same time, just to kind of not get any spam. And sometimes what they'll do is Honeypot's on by default, and if a form starts to get too much spam, they turn on CAPTCHA. So it's a way to kind of not always have CAPTCHA on. And then people, this blog post is great because it says reCAPTCHA might even be a better option. Any other questions? We have plenty of time. By this, at the end of the day. Yeah.
So, is there a way to display data collected in Webforms, like in a calendar, or like in that calendar format, like, or in a map?
That gets tricky in the sense of there's Webform views integration, so you can kind of get that data into views, and then think about what you can do in views. Views does do multi-column layouts. I don't know if a calendar would be tricky. And I will throw out, there's this pattern that people are doing, ready? They'll have a web form collect a lot of rich data, and then they'll write a handler that takes just a small subset of that data and pushes it into nodes. So then, like, the example would be, or they'll generate a user profile. So they've collected 100 different inputs, but then they'll generate a user profile. And when you do that and you push it into Drupal's full entity system, because Webform is not Field API, it's two separate systems. If you take that little data and you push it into Drupal's entity system, like a dedicated node, you open up a whole different array of possibilities. So that's one approach to it. I know it doesn't fully answer your question. I mean, one thing I will throw out is every single element has a twig template behind it that you can go customize. You can even go in the UI and write twig to change the output of how that value is going to look. It opens up a lot because you can then do includes into other systems. No problem.
I have a question around what advice would you give for paid registrations in Drupal?
Someone just sent me an email about that. Okay, outside of Drupal, don't collect payment information on your website. That's the lesson I've learned. Wait.
Payment handler with
Well, I redirect. So to not deal with the compliance, like people fill out a form, and then it redirects to a third party like Chase Bank that has their own service, and they collect the payment on their secure system. That's my general recommendation, but sometimes you need that experience that you're collecting the payment in Drupal. Right now, it seems like the best option out of the box is the Commerce Order web form handler. So you have to have Drupal Commerce on your site, but what it does is, and it's a really rich user interface, and someone demoed it, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. It's a handler where you're basically saying, okay, someone filled out the form, I want to generate an item that goes into a commerce shopping cart, and then once that happens, once you have that transition and you redirect to that shopping cart, you've got all of Drupal Commerce available to you. Every payment system, every process, calculations, and that seems like the best approach. There's also a Webform Stripe module, and that, I think gives people, there's not a lot of other payment handlers, so if you're doing a custom, I would look at the Stripe module and copy it. If you're doing PayPal or some other system.
We're doing PayPal, and I'm wondering, we use Roof for this now because it works.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can embed the Roof form on our site, have it look like the site, have it fill out the form first because we give you information that's in addition to the payment.
Mm-hmm.
Then they go on to the next step, which is actually a connection between Roof and PayPal. Fill out their information, credit card information. Then when they submit their credit card information, they actually come back to Woofu actually directs them to our own confirmation page. So for the user, they never really feel like they left the website.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the experience that they were looking to maintain.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like to get everything out of Woofu and actually have the experience in Drupal and do the same thing, basically, and have the same functionality for the admins who are getting the event registrations.
I think it's for like event registration system, it's very possible. First off, the computed element's really powerful because by the way, that computed AJAX thing is not doing that AJAX. It's not doing those calculations on the front end. It's doing it on the back end, which means you can do commerce-like calculations and no one can hack it. The values are going back. Like if you're calculating sales tax, the value is going back to the server. It's generating it in PHP and sending it back to the client. That solves one problem with the type of event registration system. Plugging in a handler is not a big deal. It's just no one's really contributed the module. I mean, I'll give a personal feeling about that space of how to do this right. Square did a demo where they're just showing how you could do e-commerce on your site in an iframe, and it solves a lot of the problems. You have a form, you have an iframe at the bottom, and it collects that credit card information, and it's talking in JavaScript to your site, but the transactions happening on their server. It solves all the security issues and provides the very clean user experience. And my feeling about the lift to do that, or the amount of work, it's not a lot of work, because these companies have great APIs now. They have APIs where you're basically like, here's my vendor ID, here's the payment amount, and and they'll take care of the rest. It'd be definitely something I'd be interested in doing. I mean, funny joke would be, I'm not so into doing it with PayPal because their APIs are a little, some of them are a little dodgy, but the more modern payment systems are spot on. They've done great documentation. Any other questions? We are done. You guys have survived a full day of conferences. Thanks for the time. Thanks for coming to the last session. How are we on time?